we were desperate, and that's why we all went into the service as fast as we could. Women who did not.
You had to stand in line to enlist.
Yeah,
in
but
those
women who
days.
did not were in Seattle and whatnot, working in plants, because they had to manufacture everything. There was nothing stored and ready. And you see, we were married for 2 years that we never saw each other. We couldn't talk, we couldn't, and the letters we wrote, they cut out great big holes to make sure we didn't spread any.
Oh, that's one thing I resented. You could not write a letter without it being read and okayed.
And cut holes in it. That was an Army picture that they took for promotion, you know, to put out for recruiting. That was a long time
That was
ago.
my hero.
Women in the military were not usual. And our purpose was to replace a man so he could go overseas and the women could stay behind and do the jobs. So I took a man's job to run this mess hall. And then I was promoted to post quartermaster, which, as I say, I'm 22 or 23 and just can do anything.
So did you cook or serve or wash dishes or everything?
No.
I had 75 cooks and bakers
I
under
was in charge of all of them. What I remember most about my time in the service was how long it was, how lonesome I got. How far from Montana.
We blundered into an ambush and were captured, and it was of short duration, and yet the captivity met the definition of prisoner of war. In definition of a day until my so-called actions saved the life of 3 people, me being one of them, and I had 2 wounded people in this ambush, and I had them in these German command posts, and I was able to save their lives, which I'm very proud of. Compared to
Ben Steele.
compared to the Billy Arnolds and the Art Kleins and the Ben Steeles, mine couldn't cast a shadow, and I don't intend to. And yet what I did met the definition of prisoner of war.
And the Germans had felled this large tree in front of us just minutes before we entered the woods. And as soon as I saw this tree, I knew we were in for an ambush. We tried to jump the tree, and the Jeep flipped over, and they immediately started shooting on both sides and wounded the driver and the officer multiple times. And I'm 3 feet away and never got touched. And
Oh my goodness.
I just can't believe that. So they loaded us in the Jeep and took us to their command post in a 2-story house in the woods. But they hid my Jeep very carefully, and we had passed a infantry unit just a few minutes before we hit the tree that I knew was going to attack this house as soon as they saw it. So I only had about 15 or 20 minutes to try to save these 2 guys that were wounded. And I begged the colonel to let me take them down the basement
In the cellar. It was a cellar.
in the cellar, excuse me. And he was mean and ornery and kept saying 9, but he finally let me drag them down, and it just must have hurt them terribly. And I found a mattress down in the cellar and put it on top of them and shoveled about that much potatoes on them, because I knew the attack was going to be there in 15 minutes is all the time I had. And so, and here's another thing that I think is unreal. The night before, I had found this white scarf in a barn that we were sleeping in, and as soon as the attack started on his house, I put this white scarf on a broomstick, and as this says here, I turned my shoulder into the window while this attack was going on so they could see my division patch. And that caused a lull in the shelling, and they hollered for me to come out. And the worst thing I remember about it is me begging this colonel not to send more men out. He ordered 8 men to go out and dig in to defend the place, and they were the first people that were butchered when our boys arrived. I feel terrible because he wouldn't let me have them surrender. And he ran into the woods himself in the middle of the attack. So when they came and saved us, I had about 20 of the Germans inside, and I conned them into surrendering, and that saved their lives. And we put the wounded boys in a medic half-track and sent them on to a field hospital. Here is the rather famous Bronze Star, and it's in terms of clout, I would quote the famous Andy Rooney of 60 Minutes. He was the war correspondent. He received a Bronze Star. You either get one for bravery or you get one for meritorious service. And in terms of clout, you put it any place you want it. Somewhere between the Good Conduct Medal and the Congressional Medal of Honor.
And this is a croix de guerre.
This is from General de Gaulle. Yeah. And I know not why or how the French government got involved with the awarding of this in conjunction with the Bronze Star.